$115 to $78 in less than 24 hours, a 32% collapse, the second worst crash in precious metals history. Not a rumor, not speculation. This happened. One presidential nomination, one name announced, and the entire monetary system began repricing itself in real time. Gold fell, Bitcoin tumbled, the dollar surged. While traders panicked, a silent group started accumulating. They know something the market doesn't see yet, because this isn't about silver anymore. I am Ken Au. Welcome to the Vault. Today we dissect the largest silver massacre in 44 years. And by the end, you'll understand why paper collapsed while physical disappeared, and what that divergence means for every dollar you hold. January 30th, 2026, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, silver trading comfortably above 110 per ounce. Investors felt secure. The metal had been climbing steadily for months. Industrial demand strong. Inflation concerns driving safe haven buying. Everything stable. By 10:15 a.m., the first crack appeared. A critical support level at $105 gave way. Not slowly, not gradually. It shattered. Trading volumes surged. Algorithmic systems triggered automatic sell orders. What started as a technical breakdown became a cascade. By noon, silver breached $90. Margin calls flooded brokerage firms. Leverage traders, those who borrowed money to amplify positions, were forced to sell. Not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. When prices fall rapidly, brokers demand immediate cash deposits to cover potential losses. Traders who can't meet these demands face automatic liquidation. This created a vicious cycle. Forced selling pushed prices lower. Lower prices triggered more margin calls. More margin calls forced more selling. By 2 p.m., the 86R level, the secondary support zone analysts identified as absolute floor, collapsed. The selling accelerated beyond human control. Electronic trading platforms designed for normal conditions struggled to process the tsunami of sell orders. In some cases, there were no buyers at all. Prices fell not because sellers found willing buyers at lower levels. Prices fell because there were no bids whatsoever. This is what traders call a liquidity vacuum. The market structure itself broke down. By market close, silver settled at $78, $37 lost in a single day, billions in paper value erased. But here's what made this different from ordinary volatility. This is where things stop making sense. While paper silver on exchanges like COMEX plummeted, something strange happened in the physical market. Dealers selling actual silver bars and coins reported inventories depleting rapidly. Premiums, the additional cost above spot price, remained elevated. In some cases, they actually increased. This created a bizarre paradox. The futures market screamed silver was worthless. The physical market said the opposite. Experienced analysts recognized this pattern immediately. In 1980, when silver crashed from $50 to $10, it was because genuine oversupply existed. The Hunt brothers had accumulated so much silver that when their scheme unraveled, real metal flooded the market. But in 2026, there was no oversupply. Industrial consumption had been growing steadily, solar panel manufacturing absorbing record quantities, electronics production requiring constant supply, medical applications expanding. The fundamentals hadn't changed. What changed was something else entirely. At 3:47 p.m., just minutes before the closing bell, the answer arrived. A presidential announcement. President Trump nominated Kevin Warsh, former Federal Reserve governor, as the next Fed chairman. Not Judy Shelton, not the sound money advocate who questioned fiat currency legitimacy, not the woman who advocated returning to gold-backed money. Kevin Warsh, a man who repeatedly called quantitative easing a reverse Robin Hood policy, transferring wealth from citizens to financial elites. A man who advocated balance sheet reduction, not expansion. A man representing the end of unlimited liquidity. Within minutes, the entire precious metals complex understood what just happened. The era of easy money was ending. Markets were repricing everything accordingly. Kevin Warsh wasn't a household name, but inside central banking corridors, his name carried weight, and those who understood monetary policy knew immediately what his nomination meant. To understand why this single nomination triggered 32% collapse, you must understand what the alternative would have meant. Judy Shelton. For months, speculation built that Trump would nominate Shelton to lead the Fed. Shelton was different from every Fed chair in modern history. She publicly questioned whether the Federal Reserve should exist in its current form. She wrote extensively about returning to a gold standard, currency backed by physical metals instead of government promises. If Shelton had been nominated, precious metals markets would have exploded upward. Why? Because a gold standard advocate running the Fed would represent existential threat to the current monetary system. It would validate every argument that gold and silver were real money. That paper currencies were temporary substitutes. Traders had been positioning for this scenario. Hedge funds accumulated silver futures expecting massive rally. Institutional investors quietly built positions. Retail buyers stacked physical metal in anticipation. But Trump didn't choose Shelton. He chose Warsh. And Warsh represented something entirely different. In 2008, during the financial crisis, Warsh was a Federal Reserve governor. He witnessed firsthand the expansion of the Fed's balance sheet from $800 billion to over $4 trillion. He saw quantitative easing flood the financial system with newly created money. And he became one of its most vocal critics. In speeches to banking conferences, Warsh called QE a policy that taxes savers and laborers to subsidize debtors and financial market participants. He warned unlimited money creation would destroy dollar credibility. He advocated for rules-based monetary policy, a system where the Fed wouldn't arbitrarily print trillions whenever markets declined. This wasn't theoretical economics. This was direct threat to the framework supporting asset prices for over a decade. Since 2008, every major market decline met the same response. The Fed would print money, buy bonds, inject liquidity, asset prices recovered. Investors were trained to expect this. It became known as the Fed put, the implicit guarantee central banks would always intervene. But Warsh explicitly rejected this approach. In a 2019 paper, he wrote, "Central banks should allow markets to function, even if that means enduring painful adjustments." He argued constantly preventing downturns only created larger bubbles, causing greater damage later. And now this man was nominated to control the world's most powerful central bank. The implications were staggering. If Warsh was confirmed, the Fed might actually allow its balance sheet to shrink, might raise interest rates even during weakness, might refuse to bail out failing institutions. For precious metals, this created a paradox. Sound money policies should theoretically support gold and silver as alternatives to debased fiat. But if the Fed stopped printing money, the immediate effect would be liquidity drain across all assets. Markets always react to immediate effects first. Within 30 minutes of the Warsh nomination, gold fell 8%. Bitcoin dropped 12%. The dollar index surged to its highest level in 18 months. But silver fell hardest of all. Why? Because silver occupies a unique position. It's both industrial metal and monetary metal, used in manufacturing but also held as store of value. When liquidity contracts, industrial demand forecasts decline. Investors holding silver purely for monetary speculation exit positions. The selling was indiscriminate. Futures traders dumped contracts, ETF holders redeemed shares, leveraged positions liquidated. But something else happened simultaneously. While paper markets collapsed, a different group watched quietly. They weren't traders, they weren't speculators, they were strategic accumulators. These individuals and institutions understood that Warsh's nomination, regardless of immediate market impact, represented fundamental shift toward monetary discipline. And monetary discipline over time always benefits hard assets. They'd been waiting for precisely this moment. A panic-driven sell-off allowing them to acquire physical metal at artificially suppressed prices. While futures contracts were dumped, physical silver was quietly absorbed. Dealers reported unprecedented buying from what they described as informed clients. The paper market said silver was collapsing. The physical market said something different, and this divergence was about to become the most important story in global finance. Someone knew this pattern, and they prepared for it. There's a game being played. Most participants don't even know they're playing it. Let me describe how it works. Imagine a casino where 1,000 people place bets on a stack of 100 poker chips. Each person receives a receipt, a promise they own chips. The casino collects fees on every transaction. Everyone trades receipts back and forth. Prices fluctuate. Fortunes made and lost. But here's the critical detail. Only 100 chips actually exist. The system works perfectly, as long as nobody asks for their chips. The moment even 15% of receipt holders demand physical chips, the entire structure collapses. This is precisely how the modern silver market operates. And on January 30th, 2026, people started asking for their chips. The COMEX, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, handles majority of global silver futures trading. On any given day, contracts representing hundreds of millions of ounces trade hands. Total value measured in billions. Leverage extraordinary. But examine actual delivery statistics and a different picture emerges. Less than 2% of COMEX silver contracts result in physical delivery. Less than 2%. The remaining 98% settled in cash, rolled forward, closed out before expiration. The silver referenced in these contracts never moves, never leaves the vault, sometimes never even exists. This creates what economists call a fractional reserve system. The same ounce of physical silver sitting in an approved vault backs multiple paper claims simultaneously, 1 bar, 10 contracts, 100 ounces, supporting 1,000 ounces of paper exposure. The leverage ratio, conservatively estimated, sits somewhere between 100.1 and 250.1. Read that again. For every actual ounce of deliverable silver, the market has sold promises on 100 to 250 ounces. Under normal circumstances, this system functions smoothly. Most traders don't want physical metal. They want price exposure. They want to speculate, hedge, arbitrage. The casino keeps running because most people are content trading receipts, but January 30th wasn't normal circumstances. Something shifted in the physical market. Industrial buyers who actually need silver for manufacturing started securing supply earlier than usual. Eastern central banks quietly accelerated purchases. Wealthy individuals growing concerned about currency stability began converting paper positions into physical holdings. Requests for actual delivery increased. Not dramatically, not even to 10% of open interest, but enough to expose the mechanism. Because here's what happens when physical demand rises in a fractionally reserved system. Bullion banks operating as intermediaries face a choice. They can either source physical metal to meet delivery requests, which drives up spot price and exposes their short positions to losses, or they can suppress price through coordinated selling in paper markets, making physical silver appear less attractive while simultaneously making it harder to obtain. Industrial consumers, companies actually using silver in manufacturing, were accelerating purchasing. They understood paper market dislocations create supply chain vulnerabilities. When prices are artificially suppressed, mines reduce production. Refiners slow operations. Future supply contracts become unreliable. So they were buying now. Solar panel manufacturers securing 6-month inventories instead of usual 30-day supplies. Electronics companies locking forward contracts. Medical equipment producers stockpiling. Strategic buyers were also entering. Sovereign wealth funds, family offices, institutional investors with 10-year time horizons. These entities weren't concerned with whether silver would be $75 or $85 next week. They were concerned with whether they could acquire thousands of ounces at prices disconnected from fundamental value. And they were buying aggressively. But there was a problem. Physical silver isn't infinite. Annual mining production approximately 830 million ounces globally, but 85% of that production already contracted to industrial users before it comes out of the ground. The amount available for investment purposes, the free float, is actually quite small. And when investment demand surges, the free float disappears rapidly. Refiners in Switzerland reported backlogs extending 6 weeks. Mints producing coins announced delays. Wholesale dealers began rationing allocations to smaller retailers. The paper market screamed abundance. The physical market screamed scarcity. This divergence happened before. In March 2020, during COVID panic, silver futures briefly traded below $12, yet physical silver became almost impossible to buy. Dealers sold out. Premiums exploded to $10 over spot. The paper price said silver was worthless. The physical market said the opposite. In 1980, the pattern was different. When silver crashed after Hunt Brothers' collapse, physical premiums collapsed too because genuine oversupply existed. But in 2026, there was no oversupply, only a derivatives market repricing based on monetary policy expectations, while the underlying physical market operated in completely different reality. This created an opportunity, or a trap, depending on who you were. For paper traders using leverage, the collapse was catastrophic. Margin calls forced liquidation. Positions closed at devastating losses. Fortunes evaporated. For physical accumulators, the collapse was a gift. Prices disconnected from fundamentals created the buying opportunity they'd been waiting for. But there was a third group, those who didn't understand the difference. Investors who owned silver through ETFs, through digital certificates, through allocated accounts at banks. They believed they owned silver, but what they actually owned was a promise that if they ever wanted physical delivery, someone would provide it. And that promise was about to be tested, because what happens when 100 people simultaneously demand delivery of an asset that only exists once? History provides the answer, and it isn't pleasant. The 32% collapse in silver wasn't an ending, it was a warning shot, a signal that the monetary regime governing global markets for over 15 years was entering terminal phase. There were two distinct groups watching chaos unfold, looking at same charts, reading same news, observing same dynamics, but reaching opposite conclusions. The first group, the traders, operating on short time horizons, days, weeks, managing leverage, monitoring technical levels. For them, silver breaking $90 was a sell signal. Failure to hold $86 confirmed bearish momentum. Their stops hit, positions closed, capital preserved. Disciplined traders saved themselves by selling into decline. But there was a second group, the accumulators. These weren't traders in any conventional sense. They weren't watching hourly charts. They weren't concerned with whether silver would close above or below a particular moving average. They were operating on a completely different time frame, years, decades, generational wealth transfer. For this group, the 32% collapse wasn't a crisis. It was an opportunity. They understood something fundamental about monetary systems. Fiat currencies, money backed by nothing except government decree, have 100% failure rate throughout history. Every fiat currency ever created has eventually collapsed. The Roman denarius, the French assignat, the German papier-mark, the Zimbabwean dollar, the US dollar in its current form, disconnected from gold since 1971, is 55 years old, already double the 27-year average lifespan, and the policies that sustained it, unlimited money printing, zero interest rates, perpetual bailouts, were being questioned by the incoming Fed chairman. The accumulators understood Warsh's nomination represented an attempt to restore fiscal discipline, but they also understood something else. The system was too far gone for discipline to work. U.S. national debt exceeded $36 trillion. Unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicare exceeded $200 trillion. Corporate debt at all-time highs, consumer debt at all-time highs. The entire economic structure built on assumption of infinite liquidity. And Warsh was proposing to turn off the tap. What would happen? Either Warsh would succeed, triggering deflationary collapse, eventually forcing return to hard money, or Warsh would fail, replaced by someone restarting money printing on unprecedented scale. Either way, physical precious metals would eventually benefit. The accumulators weren't buying silver because they believed prices would rise next week. They were buying because they believed the monetary system itself was entering endgame. And during that endgame, holding claims on physical assets would be vastly superior to holding claims on currency. But strategic positioning required understanding difference between paper and physical. Paper silver, futures contracts, ETFs, digital certificates offered liquidity and convenience, but also carried counterparty risk. The risk that the entity promising delivery would fail. Physical silver, actual metal in personal possession, offered no counterparty risk, but offered limited liquidity during panic selling. Sophisticated accumulators were structuring positions accordingly, building core positions in physical metal, bars stored in secure vaults, coins held personally, assets that couldn't be confiscated by brokerage margin call, but also maintaining smaller tactical positions in paper markets, positions sized appropriately for volatility, positions that could be liquidated without emotional distress. This hybrid approach allowed them to benefit from both strategies. Physical holdings provided long-term security. Paper positions provided short-term tactical flexibility. But there was a third consideration: timing. Even the most conviction-driven accumulator must acknowledge markets can remain irrational longer than individuals can remain solvent. Silver could fall further. The $78 level that seemed like a gift on January 30th might be $60 by February. Strategic accumulators addressed this through systematic buying. Rather than deploying all capital at once, they were averaging into positions over time. Buy some at 78. If it falls to $70, buy more. If it falls to $60, buy even more. This approach eliminated pressure of timing exact bottom, because the truth is, nobody knows where the bottom is. Not the analysts, not the traders, not the central bankers. Markets are complex, adaptive systems, influenced by thousands of variables interacting in unpredictable ways. What strategic positioning provides isn't certainty, it's resilience. The ability to withstand volatility without being forced to exit at the worst possible moment. And on January 30th, 2026, as silver collapsed 32%, two very different groups were positioning themselves. One group protecting capital by exiting positions, the other group deploying capital by entering positions, both making rational decisions based on their time frames and objectives. But only one group understood what was really happening. This move wasn't accidental. The timing wasn't random. The collapse in silver wasn't about silver. It was about transition from one monetary regime to another, from unlimited liquidity to imposed discipline, from paper promises to physical reality, from faith in central banks to faith in elemental metals. This transition won't be smooth, won't be predictable. There will be rallies that fail, declines that validate skeptics. But beneath the surface volatility, the fundamental dynamic is irreversible. The era of easy money is ending, and those who prepare accordingly will be positioned for what comes next. Not because they predicted the future, because they understood the past. And history, when it comes to fiat currencies and precious metals, has only ever told one story, the same story, every single time. The question isn't whether that story will repeat. The question is whether you'll be ready when it does. The paper market screamed panic. The physical market whispered opportunity. The divergence between what's traded and what's real has never been wider. And in that gap between perception and reality, between promises and delivery, between paper and metal, fortunes will be made and lost. The 32% collapse was the signal. The fractional reserve was exposed, the accumulators moved. By the time the mainstream understands what happened, the physical metal will be gone, the premiums will be prohibitive, and the paper promises will be revealed for what they always were. Claims on something that doesn't exist. You've been shown the pattern, the choice is yours.